Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really fascinating, almost mind-bending, ancestral trauma. Imagine this for a moment. You're in a quiet clinical room, maybe doing some kind of therapy. You're not seeing, the usual swirling colors people talk about with psychedelics. Instead, you feel like you're somewhere else entirely. There's this biting wind you've never actually felt, maybe a deep, gnawing hunger in your stomach that just doesn't feel like your hunger. You might see faces, people you don't recognize, struggling through some hardship from like 100 years ago, a time you definitely weren't born into. It feels incredibly real, almost like remembering something. But it's definitely not your memory, your own life. Pretty safe, pretty comfortable by comparison. You've only read about this kind of suffering in history books, right? And then maybe your therapist or guide suggests a name for what you're experiencing, ancestral trauma. It's this idea, this proposition, really, that the deep pain of your great-grandparents, the wars, the famines, the oppression they went through, didn't just disappear when they died, that maybe it left some faint biological echo, like a genetic ghost passed down through the generations, and it's quietly shaping your anxieties, your fears, in ways you never really got. Sounds like something, I don't know, torn between a spiritual text and a sci-fi novel, doesn't it? But this exact kind of experience, it's actually becoming a surprisingly common report from people undergoing psychedelic therapy. And it makes us ask this really deep, maybe unsettling question. Is this just a powerful hallucination? Your brain just weaving a complex story? Or could you genuinely be tapping into some kind of inherited wound? And could these substances actually be a key to healing it? So, okay, with that really vivid picture, let's try and ground ourselves a bit more. When we talk about ancestral trauma, what is that exactly?
Right. Well, it often gets called intergenerational trauma or generational trauma. The core idea is that trauma's effects can be passed down. So they affect people who didn't directly experience the original traumatic event themselves. It's like the unresolved pain from the past influencing emotional well-being today.
And what sort of hardships are we typically talking about? What kind of events leave that deep an imprint?
We're usually looking at big systemic things, colonization, slavery, systemic racism, oppression, war, genocide, famine, extreme poverty. These are the really deep societal wounds that tend to linger across generations.
Okay. And what are the telltale signs? Like, how might this show up for someone? What might they notice if they're carrying this kind of echo?
Well, there are several claimed effects people talk about. One is sort of unexplained emotional turmoil, basically feeling this unresolved pain or anxiety that feels bigger than your own life experiences somehow, like it doesn't entirely belong to you. Another thing is repetitive patterns, maybe behaviors or anxieties, like an intense, unrelenting worry about money, even if you're actually doing okay financially. It might be echoing ancestors who faced real severe hardship,
That makes sense.
And then there are relationship dynamics, patterns of maybe strained or dysfunctional relationships within families that seem to unconsciously repeat in your own relationships outside the family.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? The truly surprising part is just how often this specific theme, ancestral trauma, seems to pop up during psychedelic experiences. How does that usually manifest?
Yeah, it comes through in different ways. Often as visions or sudden insights or these big emotional breakthroughs, and they feel deeply, deeply connected to what the person perceives as the trauma of their ancestors. Sometimes it's parents or grandparents, but sometimes, it feels like it reaches back centuries, even millennia.
Wow, like a historical empathy trip, almost. A journey into this collective past. But the big question remains, is it just a really powerful hallucination, our brain creating meaning? Or is there something more substantial going on?
That's exactly where the debate really heats up, scientifically speaking. In some circles, spiritual communities, New Age thought, and definitely within parts of the psychedelic community, there's this belief that actual memories, like specific memories of ancestral trauma, can be inherited, somehow encoded in our DNA.
That sounds a bit like Carl Jung's idea, archetypes, the collective unconscious. Is it along those lines?
It sounds similar, yeah, conceptually. But there's a really crucial difference. Jung's archetypes are these universal mental patterns, right? Yeah. Inherited from our shared human experience, like the mother archetype or the hero. They aren't specific historical events or individual memories belonging to your great-grandmother, for example. The idea of inheriting specific memories like that, there's just no scientific validation for it. We don't have any evidence that memory works that way across generations.
Okay, so if direct memory inheritance is off the table scientifically, what is gaining traction? How might trauma's effects be passed down?
Well, the notion that's getting much more attention and has some scientific backing is that trauma's effects, not the memories themselves, can be passed down genetically. And this happens through something called epigenetic changes.
Ah, epigenetics.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating field. It's basically the study of heritable traits that happen without changing the actual DNA sequence. So our behaviors, our environment, things like severe stress, they can literally change how our genes are expressed, which genes get turned on or off. And this is the key part. Those changes in expression can sometimes be inherited by the next generation.
Wow, okay. That is a game changer. So it's not the literal memory of the famine, but maybe a heightened sensitivity to stress around food, a genetic predisposition to anxiety about scarcity.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. And there's a growing body of studies in both animals and humans that supports this. That significant hardship can leave these kinds of epigenetic marks on offspring. A pretty well-known example is that 2015 study by Rachel Yehuda and her team.
The Holocaust survivor study?
That's the one. They found that children of Holocaust survivors had specific epigenetic changes to a gene involved in stress response. It helps regulate cortisol levels.
That sounds huge, but I seem to remember there were some caveats or criticisms.
Yes, absolutely. While it was groundbreaking, some scientists definitely raised concerns about the conclusions drawn. And Yehuda herself has acknowledged that, well, the media coverage maybe blew the findings out of proportion a bit. She stresses that we need larger, more comprehensive studies to draw really firm conclusions. In fact, she and Amy Lerner wrote in a 2019 review that, while animal studies give us clearer results, human studies are just really tricky methodologically. And we can't yet definitively say, okay, this intergenerational effect is purely down to this one specific biological factor. It's complex.
Okay. But Yehuda still highlights this area of science, doesn't she? What's her current thinking on it?
Oh, absolutely. She definitely sees epigenetics as really important here. She points out that ancestral trauma might even impact things before conception, like affecting the mother's eggs or the father's sperm. She sees epigenetics as a crucial pathway, helping to explain how trauma's effects can persist and transmit across generations.
Which leads to a really interesting question. Is this inherited effect always a bad thing? Always a vulnerability?
That is a really important question, yeah. Are these epigenetic changes in stress genes always just markers of, damage or vulnerability? Or could they perhaps be a biological mechanism to try and better equip offspring to cope with similar kinds of adversity?
Like an adaptation.
Potentially. It's not necessarily permanent damage. It might be the body's attempt to kind of pre-program for challenges similar to what the parents faced. Of course, whether it's actually an advantage really depends heavily on the environment the offspring actually grows up in, right?
That's a profound way to think about it. Not just a burden, but maybe a form of biological resilience, however imperfect. And crucially, can these changes be reversed? Can healing happen at that level?
Yes. And that's where it gets really hopeful. Yehuda's team also did work with combat veterans who had PTSD. They found that those who benefited from cognitive behavioral therapy actually showed treatment-induced changes in the methylation of those same stress response genes.
So healing actually showed up in their epigenetics.
Exactly. It really is just this beautiful interplay between psychology and epigenetics. Healing isn't just in the mind, it can be reflected biologically. And, of course, we absolutely cannot forget the obvious factor, parental behavior.
Right.
How traumatized parents interact with their kids. That clearly plays a huge role in development, too. It's never just genetics. It's lived experience, environment, nurture, all of it.
Okay, so the picture emerging is more about inherited effects, maybe predispositions, and psychological patterns, rather than literal inherited memories. So bearing that complexity in mind, how might psychedelics actually step into this picture? How might they help? I know there are many personal stories describing really profound experiences related to this. Maybe sharing one could bring it to life for people listening. Here's one account. For years, a phantom lived in my bank account. I was a successful graphic designer, yet I lived with the financial anxiety of someone on the brink of destitution. I'd buy bruised fruit to save 40 cents. I'd wear shoes until the soles flapped. My friends saw it as a quirky frugality, but I felt it as a constant low-grade panic. During a guided psilocybin session, I didn't see visions of celestial beings, but of my grandmother's hands, raw and chapped, sorting potatoes in a dusty cellar. I didn't see her face, but I felt her gnawing dread as she counted out pennies for bread during the Irish famine's long shadow. It wasn't a memory, it was an emotional inheritance, a program of scarcity running in my mind. The medicine didn't erase it. Instead, it allowed me to see it for what it was. The echo of a love so fierce it wanted to protect her descendants from a hunger I had never known. I cried not from my own pain, but from hers. And in that moment of shared grief, I could finally thank her for the warning and gently tell her, "We are safe now. You can rest."
Wow. That's a really powerful story. And it shows how these deeply ingrained patterns, these emotional inheritances, can manifest, right? The insight gained wasn't necessarily about reliving a specific memory, but about understanding the root of a present-day anxiety, reframing it. And many organizations, many practitioners are suggesting that these kinds of experiences are really central to healing these old emotional wounds.
Yeah, some approaches like Field Trip Health talks about using ketamine therapy this way. They mention things like reframing your relationship to cultural history, fostering empathy, embracing identity, even cultivating forgiveness for ancestors. They describe ketamine as helping access and process these really deeply ingrained emotions, partly by affecting the default mode network in the brain.
Right, the DMN, kind of the brain's me network involved in self-reflection and mind wandering.
Exactly. And disrupting that might let you confront painful stuff from a different perspective, maybe leading to an emotional release.
Then you have other perspectives, maybe leaning a bit more into the less conventional side. Like Behold Retreats, they talk about ancestral medicines working with information in the cell, or experiences and memories being stored there. They suggest traumatic experiences from ancestors can be brought into consciousness during these sessions to be seen, felt, and healed. Some even refer to supposed clinical research, confirming that experience and knowledge from our bloodline is somehow in our system, or that big experiences shape DNA and get stored in cell memory.
Okay, so those claims are really going further, suggesting trauma is literally stored in the body or even energetic bodies and passed down that way. What's the scientific take on that specific idea?
Well, that interpretation is definitely contentious. I mean, even the idea that an individual's trauma is literally stored physically in specific body cells is debated and faces criticism in mainstream science. So the claim that inherited trauma is stored that way is, let's say, even more speculative and really lacks solid scientific evidence at this point.
Right. So if we stick to more grounded explanations, if it's not inherited cell memories, what are some other ways psychedelics might be helping with ancestral trauma?
A clinical psychologist, Joseph McCowan, offers a really interesting perspective that's less, let's say, New Age. He defines ancestral trauma broadly as trauma spanning generations, thinking about the ongoing legacy of things like colonization or slavery affecting indigenous and African American communities today. He talks about it as an embodied stress that comes from living under continually racist or oppressive systems.
So he's saying the harm isn't just historical, it's actively present in people's bodies and experiences right now because the systems persist.
Exactly. And he argues that psychedelics can help by deepening our capacity to just be with what's difficult, to connect with ourselves, and maybe, for the first time, view ourselves through a lens of real compassion. That shift in perspective itself can be transformative. It can lead to finding new meaning in life, in relationships, and provide a foundation for positive change and building resilience.
So it's more about acknowledging the reality of that ongoing embodied trauma without needing concepts like inherited memories, and then using the psychedelic state to foster self-compassion, maybe compassion for ancestors, achieve some catharsis, and perhaps even find motivation to address the systemic issues that continue the harm.
That's a really good summary of that perspective, yes. And another, perhaps more straightforward way psychedelics could help is by working with family dynamics directly. Trauma often puts immense strain on family relationships, right? So therapeutic approaches used during psychedelic therapy in the preparation, the session itself, and especially the integration afterwards can incorporate methods like cognitive behavioral therapy or family systems therapy to help heal those relationship patterns. It's about creating healthier ways of relating.
It really does seem like these substances can sometimes open a door to parts of ourselves, our families, our histories that were previously hidden or inaccessible. There's another story I came across, maybe a composite example, that really illustrates this aspect of understanding family patterns. A man described his father's love as feeling like a locked room. He sensed it was there, but he never felt he got the key. Affection was maybe a clipped nod, a gruff good job. But anger, that could flare up like a wildfire over nothing. And he found himself becoming like his father. The same short fuse with his own son, the same awkwardness saying, "I love you," feeling like a fraud. Then, in a ketamine-assisted therapy session, he wasn't plunged into a specific memory of his father, but into the feeling that seemed to define him. He felt this bone-deep hypervigilance, like being a young soldier back in the Korean War, the constant hum of adrenaline, the terror of a threat that never fully went away, even decades later. And he suddenly understood. His father's anger wasn't really aimed at them. It was like a shield he never learned how to put down. The only way his traumatized nervous system knew how to keep his family safe from some phantom enemy. The next time he saw his dad, he didn't demand anything. He just sat with him in silence. And for the first time, he didn't feel it as distance, but as this kind of shared, quiet watchfulness. He went home, hugged his son, and the words, "I love you," finally came out. Not like he was acting, but like a genuine promise to break that chain.
That's another incredibly moving account. And it raises a really interesting point, doesn't it? Why do these ancestral themes seem to emerge so often in these altered states?
Yeah. What's the thinking there?
Well, one possibility is simply that the person is already, consciously or unconsciously, carrying this stuff around. Maybe parents or grandparents shared stories of their own wounds, or the person learned about family history. Those stories leave really strong impressions. And in an altered state where the usual filters are down, that psychological material can just get amplified. It bubbles up as visions, thoughts, strong emotions.
So even just having the intention, going into a session thinking, I want to explore my ancestral trauma, could influence the experience.
Absolutely. Set and setting are huge in psychedelics, right?
Mm.
Your mindset and the environment setting. If your mindset includes wanting to explore this, or if it's a common narrative in the therapeutic community you're part of, that can definitely prime you to have those kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
But, regardless of the exact reason why it happens, the key thing is that many, many people find these ancestral type experiences profoundly emotional and genuinely beneficial for their mental health.
Okay, so connecting this back to the science, this is where it potentially gets really exciting again. We talked about epigenetics and trauma, but psychedelics themselves might actually induce epigenetic changes too, right?
That's right. There are multiple studies now showing that various psychedelics can lead to epigenetic changes. And researchers are increasingly suggesting these changes might be a core part of how they produce therapeutic effects. Remember Rachel Yehuda? She was also involved in a study looking at MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD.
Yeah.
They found evidence suggesting that the improvements in PTSD symptoms might be related to changes in DNA methylation. That's an epigenetic mechanism in those HPA axis genes.
The stress response genes we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The same genes implicated in stress regulation and potentially affected by intergenerational trauma. And changes in these genes have also been shown to predict whether someone responds well to standard psychotherapy for PTSD.
Wow. So it's at least possible that psychedelics might be working in part by directly addressing or modifying some of the genetic marks left by trauma.
It's a really compelling possibility, yeah. Definitely needs more research, especially for the classic psychedelics like psilocybin or LSD or DMT, because MDMA works a bit differently in the brain, but it's a very active area of investigation. Another interesting angle involves the BDNF gene.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Right. Basically, brain fertilizer, crucial for neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and form new connections. We know that the expression of the BDNF gene can be affected by early life stress, even maternal stress before birth.
And psychedelics are famous for boosting neuroplasticity.
Precisely. So researchers theorize that psychedelics might help by increasing BDNF levels. This could potentially alleviate emotional distress, maybe by correcting low BDNF levels, which have been linked to PTSD severity, and also seem to play a role in depression.
This all leads to a really fascinating fork in the road looking ahead, the potential development of non-hallucinogenic psychedelics.
Yeah, these are compounds derived from existing psychedelics or analogs, but they're designed not to produce the classic trip, the hallucinations, the altered state of consciousness. Yet the hope is they might still promote some of the beneficial biological effects, like neuroplasticity.
Which could be huge for accessibility and safety, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It offers a really promising potential option for people who want to maybe address issues like intergenerational trauma patterns, but without undergoing a full-blown psychedelic experience. It could avoid many of the acute risks and potentially be much safer for more vulnerable populations like people with a personal or family history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where classic psychedelics often carry significant risks.
But you lose that profound, subjective, often deeply emotional and insightful experience, wouldn't you? Which many therapists argue is actually crucial for the healing process.
That's the other side of the coin, exactly. And it's a really active debate. For people who aren't in those high-risk categories, maybe the acute subjective effects of a classic psychedelic are essential for working through something as deep as ancestral trauma in a way these non-hallucinogenic versions might not achieve. The experience itself, especially when combined with skilled integration therapy afterwards, might be vital for really meaningful, lasting change. We're still figuring this out.
It's definitely clear that there's still a lot we don't know for sure. about the precise nature of intergenerational trauma, about exactly how psychedelics work and how they intersect, but the pathways opening up are incredibly intriguing. Maybe let's round this out with one more story. This one speaks powerfully to reclaiming heritage. Growing up, my Lakota heritage felt like a museum exhibit. Beautiful, tragic, and encased in glass. I knew the stories of Wounded Knee, of the reservations, of the language beaten out of my great-grandparents at a residential school. But it was history, not a part of me. I felt a profound sense of emptiness, a ghost limb where my culture should have been. My first ayahuasca ceremony was terrifying. It didn't show me the trauma I expected. Instead, it plunged me into the earth. I felt the bison herds thundering through my veins, the resilience of prairie grass growing back after a fire, the immense collective grief of my people as a river flowing through me, not to drown me, but to cleanse me. I felt the strength not of a single ancestor, but of the entire lineage, a cord of survival stretching back millennia. The trauma was real, a scar on that cord, but the cord itself was unbroken. I woke up with the unshakable knowledge that my very existence, my breath, was the ultimate act of defiance and survival. Healing wasn't about forgetting the pain, it was about remembering the strength that endured it. The next week, I enrolled in a Lakota language class. I wasn't reclaiming something lost. I was finally picking up something that had been waiting for me all along.
Yeah.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive we've taken today into this really complex and just fascinating world of ancestral trauma and the potential role psychedelics might play.
It really does highlight how deeply our past, our ancestors' past, can echo in our present. And the exciting, if still developing, new avenues for potentially understanding and healing those echoes.
It's truly a journey into the hidden landscapes of our lineage, isn't it? Fascinating stuff.